ago to further the library's goals of preserving our written heritage as well as supporting emerging struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism. The members of ICSS are active in different aspects of people's struggles in the Bay Area and globally. Some of us are affiliated with specific political parties and tendencies, others are not. We respect one another, but we do not necessarily agree on all issues. Accordingly, the opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only and do not represent a group consensus on the issues discussed. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And as a group, we continue to draw inspiration from the work of Karl Marx, including his 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And I want to remind you, there's a little blurb came on saying that this meeting is being recorded, and we will endeavor to send out the recording and post it on our website as soon as possible, which will probably be either tonight or tomorrow morning. It takes a long time to get that up. And what else? Oh, and speaking that 11th thesis on Feuerbach, there's no one who exemplifies this saying than our topic today, who is Lenin. And we have a very dedicated Leninist, one of the original people who was at the library when I first came here, and from whom I learned very much. We spent a long time reading all 3 volumes of Capital together, didn't we, Raj? So we formed a bond there, and we're very happy to, before we get, so Raj will give the talk, but you're not going to moderate.
Alan, I think Alan Miller.
Alan, I would be good if Alan can do it, since he knows my style.
We know that he can. Will he? No answer means yes, Alan.
Yeah, he's been drafted.
Okay.
But where is Alan? Just 1 minute, guys. Where is Alan?
Yeah, where is he?
He was afraid that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I think he chose freedom.
No, he probably heard me start talking. He figured he'd take a break.
Yeah,
anyway, he will come back, and if he doesn't come back for some reason, then somebody else can do it.
Yeah, but that's handling the Q&A, and we'll take a break in the middle and talk about upcoming programs and so on. But we won't go off air, I don't think, if that's agreeable. We have 23 people, so I already introduced you, I think, Raj, and so we'll turn it over to your capable hands. You probably, do you want to share a screen or anything?
Before we go on, let me just, on the technicalities, I'm going to mute everybody because, we want to focus on the speaker. So if you want to speak, please, first of all, you may want to raise your hand after the speaker has, finished in the QA sessions. And and you may want to unmute yourself when you are speaking. Let's not forget about that. So I'm gonna now mute everybody and then unmute Raj so we can go on. Just one.
Go for it. Shall I begin?
No, just hold on a second.
Okay, just one other little point. There is a chat box over there. You can click on the chat icon at the bottom there. And if you want to record that, we do not post it or anything, but you can click on something that says record, and it will record it, and you can keep it for your own files. But we do not.
So there's no chat box on mine that I can see. It's on the very bottom?
Yes, at the very bottom, there's a little box next to share screen or participants that says chat.
Oh, well, it's unfortunate, but it's not here for me. So I don't really think Zoom is exactly correct on my device. That's all right.
You might be watching it on a web page,
So,
and I'm trying
on
to
a
think how
cell
to get
phone.
that
On a
through
cell
web.
phone.
Oh, okay,
Listen
that's
for a
what it
minute.
is. Yeah,
Okay, I see
that's what it
Alice is
is.
back, so we could start.
Yeah, just
Cell
1 minute.
phone.
I'm muting everybody. Just a minute. So Raj, are you unmuted or? Hello, Raj. Hello, Raj. Raj.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Okay. Are you there
yeah.
on your phone? Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. 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 9408. 9408 is your phone. Okay.
Shall I mute my on the on? Shall I mute?
What is your phone number, Raj? So I can
on-
unmute that.
Thank you.
Okay. Good.
So I have muted myself on the screen, but my phone is unmuted. So that's how I will speak. Now, can everybody see the bullet points on the screen? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
No,
yes,
I mean, I can see them, but I can't read them.
yes. they're
Okay,
up,
that's
Raj.
all right. I will read them as I go along. So I've got 4 bullet points here, major ones, and then there are subheadings just for my purposes, so that I don't go off into a tangent. So today, Lenin's birthday, of course, 150th birthday was on 22nd of April, and we had a program with Shankar in India, who's from the CPI-ML Liberation Wing. And then I suggested we should have a program on Lenin from our institute, Institute for Critical Study of Society. But it so also happens that Marx's 202nd birthday is on the 5th of May. So this is a very big period, 22nd. We have 2 icons of our movement born within this 10 or 14 days, within 2 weeks. Everybody can hear me still?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yes, fine.
Thank you. So I just want to start. I'm going to do a mixture between Lenin's ideas, which I think are important for us to talk about, but not just the historically, but also their relevance to the extent they are relevant in our time. So I start by a brief review of past 39 years journey of the US working classes. That's the period of Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump, okay, altogether 39 years. So what happened in these 39 years? Tax rates on the filthy wealthy reduced to equal to or below ordinary workers' tax rates. Jobs shipped out, wars launched, banks and financials robbed people, wealth and income polarized big time. Middle class standard of workers, when I came here in 1966, dropped to first to proletarian and then to precarious proletarian. Means they don't even have a guarantee of any job, and although they say job rate is low before the COVID, really those jobs are jobs that don't pay enough for people, at least 2/3 of the people, to be able to live on. And they are often not permanent. I mean, permanent, forget permanent. They can be laid off at any time. Okay, so then U.S. was as a sole superpower in 1991 at the collapse of the Soviet Union, gave way, and there was a lot of triumphalism at that time, that end of history has arrived, so forth, and just 20 years, 30 years later, has given way to a two-pole world, okay, by now, the second pole being China. COVID-19 now, which is what we are living and talking to each other in this brave new world, has exposed U.S. as an oligarchy, which it was for the last same 40 years, developing as an oligarchy over time, and now it's a complete oligarchy. But it's also weak, pathetic, and as the title of Charlie's book says, which is actually about capitalism, not the United States, but it's a hollow colossus. That's the same. I'm borrowing words from his title of his book. So anyway, so then I go to the brief review history of the modern working class, and these two sections, 3 sections are going to be brief. I'll spend much more time on the 4th section. So the second is brief review of the history of the modern working class, attempts to gain power. There are a number of attempts, right? So the French Revolution of 1789 to Paris Commune of 1871 is a period of 82 years. Bourgeoisie is born as a political entity in 1789, and along with also proletariat is born. In a modern proletariat is born along with it in the French Revolution. And proletariat struggles from their moment on, has setbacks. The French Revolution, you know, is finally defeated, and comes Napoleon and so forth. And then 1848, there is this European Revolution, where in France, and all over Europe, there's an attempt at rising in 40. That's the time when Marx and Engels write Communist Manifesto. And so all that struggle takes place, and 1871 is when they actually have a victory in Paris. The proletariat takes power. It lasts for, I think, 6 weeks or so, if I remember correctly. But then it is crushed. But it was also crushed in 1851 when Louis Bonaparte, who's the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, has a coup against his own self. He was elected, kind of like United States president. He was elected president of France, and then he has a coup against his own presidency. And because the coup is basically supported by the two reactionary groups. One was the landlords, the other was the financial oligarchy, which was developing out of trading, you know, through trade of East India Company and other trading. You know, East India Company of France was founded in 1603. So it's developing that. So and so proletariat basically wins victory and then is defeated in 6 weeks. This is in the lifetime of Marx, who lived from 1818, born in 1818 and died in 1883, 65 years. So both 1848 and 1848 to 51 events in Europe, and 1871 Paris Commune, which Marx studies and writes about in his books, Civil War in France, and then 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. So those are the things. Of course, Lenin studies very closely, along with his study of dialectics, along with his study of capital. Lenin is a consummate student of all this. And so Lenin is drawing. So what is happening is Lenin is drawing lessons from all that keenly watching what happened, particularly the Paris Commune, but also before. Marx, of course, he wrote the Critique of Political Economy and this analysis of these revolutions. So what are then Lenin's main contributions? There are two. One set of them is in theory, and he wrote Imperialism, Analysis of Capital in its Highest Stage. And second, that was 1916. And then second is theoretical contribution is Alliance with Peasants and Nationalities. Now this is coming from Marx, his study of the situation in Europe, in France. So the nationality thing is then further carried by Stalin in his book of the same name. Now in practice, biggest thing Lenin did was to fight opportunism and adventurism, both. And the creation of a vanguard party. He was a guide to the insurrection and capture of power by the working class. And fourthly, to begin building socialist state and socialist economy, which Stalin completes in 1939. Now, there are people who have a lot of criticism of that, but I'm going to leave Stalin aside for this presentation, focus on Lenin. So then, there's just a brief outline, and excuse me. So the question then is, sorry, I'm going to go further down the page so you can see, those of you who are able to. So I pose the question, can the US working class achieve power by mass struggle and electoral politics? As you know, Sanders has this Our Revolution movement within the Democratic Party, and this is an electoral strategy, he says, goes beyond that the pressure of the movement is going to take us in the right direction. He's not talking about capture of power, but he's talking about gaining a lot of reforms so working class can live in a decent life. The other one previous to that was Green Party's attempt. Ralph Nader was at one time the iconic figure for that movement. Then the existing communist parties, there's a coalition of Peace and Freedom Party. And then, of course, there is also Progressive Labor, which has its line, a revolutionary line. But all these parties do not have the mass base of the working class at the moment, okay? So then there are two opportunism in all this, that one is right, the other is left in the communist thinking today. I'm going to leave it there because I'm going to develop it in the following section. So just I want to make a note of that there are two opportunism in communist thinking in the United States today. So now this is the main section. This is where I'm going to spend quite a bit of time, if you will be patient with me. So first thing Lenin did was he complete rejection of national chauvinism. And that went to the point of revolutionary defeatism in World War I, okay? Because to have any kind of patriotism about that war was the betrayal of the working class and the poor peasants. It was a poor peasant's son fighting in the war. Poor peasants were degraded, living semi-human life, badly treated by both the government and the landlords and so forth. So he finds the right moment. Lenin finds the right moment in that period and evolves this strategy, knowing imperialism has reached a stage of what he calls moribund capitalism. It has lost its vitality. And so Lenin's alliance, but Lenin's alliance with peasantry is not entirely Lenin's. It's coming from Marx, who was saying about the Paris Commune that the Paris Commune was unable, they were not unable to reach poor peasants. They were poor peasants at that time because land was, because of the revolution in France, there were a lot of small peasants who owned land, but small pieces of land. So that alliance could not be brought together. That lesson Lenin takes to heart. In the case of Russia, the peasant masses were about 82%. Not all of them were peasant, but this is the complete peasant society: children, women, all the artisans, and that are part of the peasant life. So rejection of national chauvinism. The other is, and this is an important one, his understanding of the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, and the proletariat. Now here I'm going to quote, and I hope you'll be patient with me on this kind of long quotes, but then I comment on it because I bring it to our time as best as I can understand it. So Lenin says in his State and Revolution, a lot of these quotations are from there, the bourgeoisie strengthened the bureaucratic and military apparatus. This proceeded all through the numerous bourgeois revolutions in Europe since the fall of feudalism. Big bourgeoisie brought petty bourgeoisie to its side and subordinated it to itself largely by means of this bureaucratic and military apparatus, which provided the upper strata of the peasantry, small artisans, tradesmen, and the like with comparatively comfortable, quiet, and respectable jobs, which raised them above the people. So this critical thing here is the petty bourgeoisie, okay? In Russia, this was quite large, okay, because peasant owning lands were pretty substantial. They were probably, they were not, before the revolution, they were not the majority, but they were pretty good, significant number, maybe 25–30%. In the advanced countries at the end of, I'm reading again from Lenin, at the end of the 19th, the beginning of the 20th century, so now Lenin is coming to this 20th century, the same process has been going on in varied forms. On the one hand, the development of parliamentary power, both in the Republican countries, which he includes France, America, and Switzerland, and as well as in the monarchies, England, Germany, and to a certain extent, Italy, the Scandinavian countries, etc. They all had monarchies. Although bourgeois development and bourgeoisie was there as well. On the other hand, a struggle for power among the various bourgeois and petty bourgeois parties, which distributed and redistributed the spoils of the office. So when the bourgeoisie came to power, and the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeois parties, they were kind of sharing power based on their strength, okay? But none of them, while the foundation of bourgeois society remained unchanged, and finally the perfection and consolidation of the executive power, its bureaucratic and military apparatus. So in the United States, that executive power rests in the president and its supporting apparatus in the various departments, including the military. So the revolt, now he's talking about, Lenin's talking about a revolt took place, right, in 17 of the, sorry, yeah, so this is the revolt Lenin found in the Russian Revolution. So there was a 1905 Russian Revolution, defeated, but the revolution didn't die. Revolution went into hiding, into splintered. There was a lot of splitting happened. The Bolsheviks also withdrew, couldn't fight, but they maintained their ideology. Their cadres were intact, and then so if you bring it to the United States, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. So 1917, when the February Revolution takes place, all this the people who take power are the socialist revolutionary Kerensky, and they have the Mensheviks with them. They're doing the same thing. They're redistributing portfolios and what have you. They leave the military intact. They keep the war going, and that made the Russian proletariat and the poor peasantry more angry at the state. Okay, the state now calls itself a socialist state, but it's carrying on things in the same way it was being carried on before, except they were the holders of the spoils of this so-called revolution, the February Revolution. And so they were willing to overthrow it. In other words, the workers and the peasants who were suffering and had been brought along in consciousness by the Bolsheviks were willing to throw it, and Bolsheviks were willing to lead it. So now, what is it in the United States in 2020? Bureaucratic and military apparatus in the US has monstrous proportions. It is what is referred to as deep state, as you know, by the left and also the right. The petty bourgeoisie bourgeoisie class has about 80 million people, in my estimation, in the United States, which is about 25% of the population. This includes their families, of course. But the peasants are a rather small part of it. So that's different. Petty bourgeois class in the United States in our time, leaving aside from a small upper stratum, has been under pressure since at least 2001, if not before. But now, COVID-19, this is a new situation for all of us. I think it is completely ruining it. It may recover, time will tell that, but probably not fully. And so there is this situation where the petty bourgeoisie is being ruined. It used to be aligned substantially to the bourgeoisie in the United States. In some ways, COVID-19 might change the dynamics here. Now, the military and bureaucracy in the United States has been developing ever since First World War, if not before, then in Second World War, then the Cold War, and then it just keeps on growing, as you know, military-industrial complex, what we call. Okay, so this is, and the executive power in the last 39 years, we know, is getting more strengthened, reducing the power of the Senate, and so they basically meekly go along when the president launches a war. They go along, and in any case, a lot of them are very rich people in both houses. Now, what is going on since 1990 is a very different dynamic. Okay, 1991, Soviet Union collapses, right? And what is happening since that time is that there is, on one hand, United States has exported capital, primarily to China, but other countries also, and shipped out these jobs that I'm talked about. And its corporation made huge profit at the backs of Chinese workers. And in China, where the Communist Party remained the political party guiding this process, became kind of but it also guided capitalist development in China. So there's capitalist development in China, which now is beginning to get large enough to rival and be the other center of capital. So there are other poles before that until 70s and even 80s was the socialist states of China and Russia, the Soviet Union, and allied with some other countries, smaller countries, Vietnam, which struggled, and Cuba all the way. All these were aligned. But after 91, all of that fractures. And now the second pole reemerges. For a while, there was only one pole, and there was this triumphalism. Maybe Kautsky was right, and so forth, that there could be a single source super imperialism. But once China emerges this time, not as a socialist pole, but as a capitalist pole, this basically reaffirms Lenin, in my opinion, that it is impossible, the single source, single superimperialism. So the next part is the Marxism and class struggle. So in this, basically what Lenin is saying is that class struggle Marx says that class struggle is not even in classes. I didn't come up with those terms. The bourgeoisie long before me said there are classes in society. That's not something I knew, something I contributed. Lenin says basically that he contributed in this regard that these classes are tied to a particular period. That when there could come a period, which is what we're struggling towards, when there are no classes. Okay, so these classes are a reflection of its time, and the state is actually a reflection of the conflict between classes. Okay, and so Lenin says the opportunism does not extend the recognition of class struggle. So even bourgeoisie recognizes class struggle. Marxism, this is common between them. But he says the opportunism does not, opportunism that is in the Marxist circles, does not extend the recognition of class struggle to what is the cardinal point, to the period of transition from capitalism to communism, to the period of overthrow and complete abolition of the bourgeoisie. In reality, this period inevitably is a period of an unprecedentedly violent class struggle in unprecedentedly acute forms. And consequently, during this period, the state must inevitably be a state that is democratic in a new way. That is, it is for the democratic for the proletariat and propertyless peasants and others, and dictatorial in a new way against the bourgeoisie. I have lost the connection to Zoom, but can you guys hear me? Mehmet? Hello?
Hi, yes, Raj. Okay, let me get your screen up because we lost your screen share. So you had sent me the bullet points. So let me put that up. Just give me
put item 4. So item 4 shows. I'm on item 4 now.
Let me see. Are people seeing my screen now or not?
Yes.
Okay, item 4. Okay, towards the end.
Yeah,
okay.
Go down to item 4. Okay.
All right.
So, so then, in class struggle, what Lenin is saying is that the class struggle, those who don't recognize the class struggle for overthrow of the bourgeoisie are actually not Marxists, because the bourgeoisie also recognizes class struggle. It's only the overthrow, when you say, is then, and that goes through an acute, violent phase, according to Lenin. Okay, so I think here, I return to what is, so there are two poles emerging. Today, I think opportunism among us would be, if we don't recognize there are two capitalist poles emerging, okay? One is China, and I know a lot of comrades here with whom I have a lot of, to whom I have a lot of affection will violently disagree with me on this. But these are the two poles, China and Russia in an alliance, and maybe some other countries also quietly backing them. And then the old one, which is actually degrading, turning into oligarchy, but militarily very powerful. Okay. So this cannot end in any way. Like if China becomes dominant power in the world, US collapses. It's not socialism at that point. It's going to be another pole, capitalism, and another pole will rise somewhere else. So the only way it will end is if this is completely overthrown, okay, in my opinion. And that I think I'm saying this because it's Lenin's birthday celebration that we're doing. I'm saying this is what Lenin is saying, okay? So I'm interpreting it in today. Now, how will this happen in the United States? I don't know. This is not something I can say, but we are, I think, living in a pregnant time, you know. And with the COVID coming here, there's another a complete new reality upon us, a rather radical reality. And so we're living in a time already before COVID, and a time that is, you know, this whole thing is changing, okay? We don't see a revolutionary movement in the United States, and we have, all of us want that revolutionary movement to come about and strengthen, but it's not there. So it is probably in its boom, in the boom of this pregnant time, and then when that comes about, who knows? A new Lenin will be born, okay? By the revolution will give birth to it. So anyway, the thing about one other aspect of Lenin's thinking that's important, I think, to talk about is smashing of the old state machine, okay? So he says this is truly in the interest of the people. People means the majority, the workers and most of the peasants. This is the preliminary condition for a free alliance between the poorest peasants and the proletarians. Now, in our case, it will be the petty bourgeoisie, the poor petty bourgeoisie, relatively poor petty bourgeoisie. You know, people who do the work for themselves or have their families and or a few employees, and they're kind of surviving. I mean, all these restaurants that are closed kind of fall into that. That's one of the things. Whereas without such an alliance, democracy is unstable, and socialist transformation is impossible. And Lenin is talking about democracy, but he's not talking about bourgeois democracy, where you just go to vote, and then one of the two major parties then hoodwink you into believing that they're doing something for you, but behind the scenes they're for the Wall Street. And Obama had the entire Wall Street bankers running his Treasury Department and everything. The economic advisors were from there. So you know whose democracy that is. So for Lenin, the democracy is when the working class and poor peasants or the petty bourgeoisie take over as in alliance, and then they change things radically. So the other thing is suppression of the standing army. Marx says the first decree of, this is Marx saying, the first decree of the Paris Commune was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it, the armed people. Okay, now this is what Lenin says, socialist revolutionaries, this is his time, 1917, after February. The socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, who actually took power after the February Revolution, refused to carry out this demand. You know, they refused to disband the army, and they instead were willing to fight even more strongly. Okay, that's what they were doing. So Lenin says, in the Paris Commune, they replaced the smashed state machine by fuller democracy. Abolition of the standing army, all officials to be elected and subject to recall, and most importantly for Lenin, paid only a skilled workman's wages. And that's how Soviet Union it started. It changed afterwards, you know, and that's going to be very controversial about when it changed. It changed under Stalin, or did it change under Khrushchev and all that. But this is part of democracy means nobody is getting rich and is lording over others. It's not just the bourgeoisie, but it's also in the state. So you don't have a democracy if those conditions are not present. So Lenin says in 1917 Russia, this is before the revolution, so this is from a State and Revolution book. It is still necessary to suppress the bourgeoisie and crush its resistance. This was particularly necessary for the Paris Commune, One of the reasons for its defeat is that it did not do this with sufficient determination. But the organ suppression is now the majority of the population, not a minority, as was always the case under slavery, serfdom, and wage slavery. And since the majority of the people suppressed their oppressors, a special force for the suppression is no longer necessary. Now, Lenin found himself to have to vary from it somewhat. By 1921, when he's explaining this, he uses slightly different terms. He says this is like a truck with its axle and its driving mechanism. So he started to modify because Russia is a large, complex country, and the dictatorship of the proletariat had to have an armed detachment of workers. That's what they created after the attack and almost killing of Lenin that took place. So then Lenin says, in this sense, the state begins to wither away. The state that stood for suppression of the majority of the people, as it does in the bourgeois society, is no longer needed, that kind of state. So it's in that sense, and everybody who works for the state now represents the majority until they begin to fatten their purses and corruption happens and they create their own little things. But he's not talking about that. That's the other issue that supposedly Stalin dealt with, and I believe he dealt with it with a firm hand, but which could not be suppressed. And there are failures on part of Stalin on that too. So, but Lenin places this very important, that part of democracy means nobody's too rich and nobody's too poor. I mean, I got to tell you, Charlie wrote this book. It's a small book, which I think he wrote about 10 years ago or so. And he talks about this, no rich, no poor. I mean, that's the objective of a communist society, is that nobody's rich, nobody's poor, and we have a society in which people can live in harmony. And then Lenin also talks about parliamentarism. Basically, parliament, like we have the two houses, basically they talk a lot, but in the end, they serve only the master, that is capital. And in our time, that's really dominated by finance capital. So that's pretty much, we can go into discussion, but just let me give you a few things that I see that are different from Lenin's time. First of all, unlike that time, women in the workforce for the capitalist class, I mean, women have always worked. I don't want to say women in the workforce. They've always worked, okay, whether they worked at home, in the fields. But they are now employed starting in 70s onwards, working for the capitalist class, capitalist system. And that basically, capitalism benefits by cheapening of labor power. What a man earned, be able to carry, be able to feed his family, clothe and send children to school, etc., is no longer possible, as you must have seen, that really both people have to go to work in order to just keep on going, okay? So there are many more women now in the United States, the workforce. They may not be equal amount, but they are nearly equal, or maybe they are equal. The other is women's gender equality movement. So this is a democratic revolutionary thing. The women are saying they have been abused. Men abuse them historically in their relationship, but also because the capitalism abused them and they abused the women. Okay, I mean, there was some kind of relation, that too. So that is going on, but there is this bourgeois side to it, which we have to deal with, which is, all you have to say is this man did something to me, and then all of a sudden you're shaming the man, and without listening to it. And this issue has come up with our Democratic presumed nominee. Petty bourgeoisie is no longer present. We are no longer primarily present. I already pointed that out. Precariat, I mentioned, different from the proletariat. Jobs are not secure. You may be having a job today. Your job may shift from underneath you, may be automated. Automation is much more dominant. Charlie's book on the Hollow Colossus deals with that. Finance capital, much more dominant. I mean, it was dominant in Lenin's time, but I think it's even more dominant. Black movement, which got started long ago, but in which it got started with the Civil War in the United States, right? But then its real boost came from Second World War and following Second World War, when the two leaders emerged, one Martin Luther King, the other Malcolm X. But it is split now. Petty bourgeois section is now associated with the liberals, and the rest of the blacks are actually represented by nobody, or parties say we represent them, Democratic Party, but they support, they basically become part of identity politics. Trade unions, very weak, very, less than 10%, like I'm told 7%. Internet replaces telegraph, of Lenin's time. It revolutionizes communication, and it, very importantly, it's part of the automation, the computer revolution, the internet, along with the internet. State is much more omnipotent and much more armed. People are more atomized. The bourgeois society has atomized people much more today than they were in Russia of 1917. They're more separated, and then that makes them subject to this consumerism that's the outgrowth of this sick capital today. And all of that is associated with ecological degradation and ecological crisis, massive destruction of species, dislocation of people. So what we have in our time is actually, these are the elements that are different from Lenin's time. So with that, I would stop here and go into the discussion period. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I think Alan was going to moderate. Eugene, do you want to say something in between?
Yes. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we need to take a quick pause here to, first of all, make a fund appeal, let you know how you can contribute to the upkeep of our institute here, and also announcement of future programs. So first of all, I believe I think I just put the information on the fund appeal, but Richard may want to say something about, he is now our treasurer, and he has the mechanism for putting together, for contributing to the Institute. And I just put the information into the chat room. But Richard, do you want to say something? Apparently,
Unmute yourself. Okay.
Yeah, if you I'm glad you put the details on the chat. I also have it on my shared screen if anybody needs it, finds it easier there. And I think Jean is also including it in the emails that go out. We continue to have expenses, so we appreciate some money came in from last week, and I hope people will continue to contribute. My suggestion is that instead of there's these small contributions every week that people make somewhat larger contributions over a 3 or 4 week intervals. There is a slight charge on PayPal for transferring money, so that would make sense. And also, if people have other ways that they'd like to transfer money, please get in touch with me and we can explore that also. Thanks.
Would you enumerate some of the expenses?
I'm sorry?
Would you enumerate some of the expenses so we know that what?
Well, the main expenses, we're still supporting the Marxist library. So that's the main expense. I suspect we're the only people who are paying for it now, because we paid in advance.
That's correct.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So
I'm just verifying what Richard said, that nobody else is paying because nobody else is meeting there.
Hey, don't make all that noise. Turn your speaker off. Thank you.
Because the library is totally closed. So, and this group is the only one that paid in advance. And of course, we're not going to ask for a refund.
We also have, this is Gene, we have $15 a month, which we pay for the email program to send out the notices. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing, but we're pushing the 500 people limit. So it may, and if we go over 500 people, that will increase our monthly charge by 100%. It'll go up to $30 about a month. So we do have some real expenses. But I think we really need to keep the library in mind because this is such an important institution that we don't want it to disappear. Should I go on to mention the upcoming programs?
No, it could be posted unless people want to make input into whether or not.
I do want to mention what we have next week because it follows the present discussion. And it's going to be talking about the Bernie Sanders movement, its historical antecedents and its legacy. And a lot of people, I think that the socialism started with Bernie. And that's not true in the United States. A lot of people do know about Eugene Debs. We all know and love him. But we have to go back to Robert Owen, who came to the United States in the 1820s. And he was really the first socialist in the United States. And the movement has grown, expanded, and transformed itself in that time. So that's what we'll be talking about next time, myself and Roger Harris. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alan.
Okay, we have a few hands that are up. Why don't we start with Sharon, if you would unmute your microphone and ask your question. Keep it to 2 minutes.
Okay, I have 3 short comments. Thank you, Raj, very much. On the historical framework that you gave, of course, it was necessarily very brief, but I think it's really important to emphasize the role of revolutionary defeatism, which I hope everyone knows what that is. It's essentially the line of the Bolsheviks to turn the guns around. It took Russia out of the war, and all those soldiers who came home were supporters of, not all of course, but a large part of those soldiers who came home were supporters of the Bolsheviks. And then also you didn't mention the civil war that followed, which was extremely devastating. And it's a whole history in and of itself. Secondly, on the COVID and the collapse of the petty bourgeoisie in the United States, I don't think we understand that very well. We're just beginning to see it, see the glimmers of it. Marxists have always understood that the petty bourgeoisie could go either way, could be allies of the bourgeoisie or allies of the proletariat. And of course, the petty bourgeoisie is being pushed into the proletariat. The question is, will they come on our side and politically? And I think that that's a very important thing to watch and analyze and participate in. And the third thing I wanted to mention was, of course, I'm one of the people who does not agree with Raj on the characterization of China. But that's a whole other long discussion, of course. But I think that the two capitalist poles emerging, the one that is opposed to the United States is what's often called BRICS or BRICSA: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And that's the Chinese view, the Chinese Communist Party's view of, standing against the major pole, the U.S. Thank you.
We could go to the second person.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I
think if you talk about BRICS, really the force in BRICS, because of its economic weight, is China. And but the point really is not as much as in a way, Sharon and I are agreeing that there are two poles, but I guess Sharon is disagreeing whether that pole is a capitalist pole, and that's the difference. And I mean, capitalism has risen in China. Nobody can deny that. I mean, how else is production? They create commodities. So it is capitalist mode of production which dominates in China. You can say that it's being controlled by communist parties, so therefore it's different. And yes, I think it is a little different, but you know, Marx's analysis, his own analysis wouldn't let you go there. I mean, for a brief period of time, Russia had this new economic policy on which Lenin was pretty strongly attacked by German left communists. And he wrote a response to it, which is titled Left-Wing Communism, an Infantile Disorder. You must have read it, I'm sure. So, but Lenin says, you know, I'm not going to keep it going. We need to survive. The peasants are saying, you communists are so good, you can go to heaven in your bodies, but can you run the economy? I mean, this is after war communism. So, so Lenin said, we got to let go and let's have these markets function for the produce from the countryside. We know there's going to have consequences, but we'll deal with it. But we're going to remove it as soon as possible. Well, he died. You know, Lenin had a stroke in April of 1923, although he lived another year, but he basically was out of it. Then, so from there on, there is the struggle between Stalin on one side, Zinoviev and others, you know all about that. And finally, Stalin moves to extend socialism in production of agricultural, and that's how they build their economy. Now in China, it's the other way around. It's going from a collective production to capitalist production. So yes, the Communist Party is in control, but more and more the decision have to be made, and I'm not blaming them, but the market and the demands that the export, they're even exporting some capital now. So China, even though it's managed by this, and I said, okay, I can agree with this idea, and I gave it, instead of 7 years, which happened 1921 to 28 in Russia, I said, okay, let's give China 14 years. Okay, 21 years. Well, it's how long is it now? It's more like 29 years. Okay, and it's just going in the same direction. So now they're saying, well, we're going to build a moderately wealthy society in 50, by 2050, it will be done, and then we'll have socialism. If anybody believes that's the way it will happen, well, I wish them good luck, but I don't think so. I think it's all relations, internal and external, are driven and how capital functions. So that's my response.
Okay, Marilyn, you had your hand up.
Yes, yes. Hello. Thank you very much, Raj, for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I also appreciate at the end how you noted what's different today from in Lenin's time. In particular, your mention of automation. I see us on the brink of a huge, a very oppressive technocracy that's controlled by a few oligarchs, with mass surveillance and microchipping us and automation, robotics, and all that. So yeah, that's something we have to watch out for. But what I want to focus on now is I really, really appreciate your making this very simple and straightforward statement of the objective of a communist society, namely, nobody's too rich and nobody's too poor. I don't think we hear that often enough. We hear a lot of jargon, a lot of different terms, but when you put it like this, nobody's too rich and nobody's too poor, that's something that everybody can understand. And I'd love to see us express that much more often, which brings me to my question. When you talk about overthrowing the bourgeoisie, here's how I see it. And this is what I would like to put out as a rallying cry for all of our social movements across the board, right and left, petty bourgeois, people who are the precariat, everybody. Namely, we must challenge the sanctity of private property rights at the top and expropriate the excessive wealth of the super rich. Let me say that again. We must challenge the sanctity of private property rights at the top and expropriate the excessive wealth of the super rich. That's got to be bottom line first thing, and then figure out everything. That is such an unacceptable status quo. And the more people say it, we've got to get it out there. So I'd like to get your feedback, Raj. Do you think that's a reasonable rallying cry?
Well, I think that's very reasonable. Yesterday, Progressive Labor Party had a session on rent, but the rent is also tied to incomes. So basically, the landlords are the more regressive section of the capitalist class, but the incomes are really the reason why workers can't pay their rent. Even in a socialist society, I think North Korea, the housing is free. I think they don't charge anything, or maybe I'm wrong about that. And in the Soviet Union, it was very nominal. Even in Khrushchev's time, that there's a lot of housing built for the working people. But yeah, I think this whole source of income, I mean, you don't need a lot of income if you have a socialist society because everything is socialized. So your education is free, your housing is very little, and you just need a little bit of money. But in fact, the more money comes in, that's another way people start hoarding, and then inequality rises, and then somebody finds a way to make money out of money. And I think this is the thesis of Kieran and Kenny in the Betrayal. Socialism Betrayed, is that the economy, black economy, grew in the shadows. So I perfectly agree with you. I mean, it's a very simple thing. I'm drawing it from Charlie. Maybe Charlie wants to say something on this. Because this is his book. Charlie, is Charlie around? I mean, if he's around, I would like him to make a comment on that.
And can you please tell us the title of the book and the last name of the author? Thank you.
No Rich, No Poor by Charles Andrews, and I think he's with us.
Yes, that's what it's called. No Rich, No Poor. It came out in 2009. You can go on the web and buy it through the usual channels. You could go down to an independent bookstore if it were open, or you can call them up and they can order it for you. You can have it direct through Barnes and Nobles, etc. You know, it's an agitational thing that tries to express the direction we're moving. It also has some deeper theoretical content to it, in that the way you're going to get to narrowing the incomes on both ends so that you have no rich and no poor is you're going to have to develop everybody's talents in labor and everybody earning within that comfortable range for their work. This is not a welfare type scheme. It's something about a new world of work as well as a new world of equality. I think that's enough on that.
Okay, next is Karthik. Let me unmute you. Karthik, are you still there? Okay, I'll put him on hold. How about Richard? Can you comment?
Oh yeah, okay.
Right. So the question.
Well, yeah. Well, one thing I want to mention also is the question of Lenin talking about the party of the new time. And I think that was a very important contribution. His argument against the Second International, one of them was that these parties were flabby, they were not revolutionary parties. And he talked about what are the requirements for a revolutionary party. And he defined some of the things for that time. You know, a party of a revolutionary cadre, professional revolutionaries, discipline, theory. But I think we have to now talk about what is the requirements. We have to have a theoretical understanding. What is the requirements of a revolutionary party in the United States in the 21st century? Because I don't think we have one. So that's one thing. That's one task for Leninists. The other thing is I want to talk about the developments of capitalism, which I think Raj skipped over a little bit in his very short thing. I think the most important development is the consolidation of world capitalism under the general control of US imperialism. That is, we have a world capitalist system now in which capitalists look to the protection and the subordination to US imperialism. And that's a new development probably since World War II. There are no independent capitalists. So to talk about so that's, and if you accept that, then you see what the mistake of Raj and other people in thinking that there are two capitalist poles in the world. There can't be two capitalist poles in the world, I would argue. There's only one. And the other pole of necessity has to be a socialist, communist pole, even though in many ways there are private ownership of the means of production in some respects, and there are various problems. But there is no reason for Chinese capitalists or Russian capitalists or even Cuban and Vietnamese capitalists to want to not want to be under the protection of US imperialism, which offers protection to all capitalists, the most corrupt, especially the most corrupt ones. But I think we should talk, that needs to be talked about. There's a lot of real problems with that.
Richard, that's your 2 minutes.
Theory of two capitalist poles. Incidentally, the Greek Communist Party, which I think is in many ways very good, has the same error, makes the same error as Raj.
Mm-hmm. Raj,
just quickly, I will not get into argument with Richard. I know that's the other view, and I think we'll have a struggle in between our views as comrades, not at each other's throat, but as comrades. And I think I will only briefly say what Lenin said about politics. He said politics is concentrated economics. What does that mean? Means if you have a capitalist mode of production, that's economics, right? And politics has to be an expression of that, not the other way around. That you pick an ideology because you're a communist, but then you run a capitalist society. That is totally contradictory to what Lenin is saying. So if you're a Leninist, you have to first resolve your position with Lenin in that regard. So let's move on to the next person.
Okay, Karthik is back. I think he got cut off last time. Go ahead, Karthik.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can,
yeah. So I have one question, one comment, and definitely my question is connected to the Richard's question also. So it is true that you explained very well the last 40 years that working class organization and working class, then the class itself is weakened by some welfare politics of the American imperialist. The question is, even the working class movement may be ascending or descending with respect to external internal conditions. But as Richard told, there should be a revolutionary vanguard or revolutionary party which should not diminish over any period of time. And when the working class movement is ascending, then this revolutionary vanguard will lead them. But now we are in a situation that we have to, in my opinion, almost restart the working class mobilization. So what does the institute have any program that how this working class mobilization can be started again? And also now we are in the period that you told that internet replaced the telephone and telegraph. That if it is a situation, there is an organization called the Tech Workers Coalition who have taken initiative. I do not know their political inclination, but they have taken an initiative in mobilizing the tech workers, and the institute is in touch with them that how such workers can be brought into the idea of overthrowing the oppressive system overall. And these are the questions. As far as the comment is concerned, Lenin supported the overwage or the more wages for the specialist, and which is very much discussed in the RCP's Bolshevik faction's 8th Congress, and also it is placed in the new economic policy, where the average wage is 500 rubles per month for the specialist, and extraordinary organizers, as the CPC minute says, that they will get a salary up to 3,000 rubles, and which is approved by Lenin, and Lenin is very much in support of the new economic policies. So that's a comment. But if you can reflect on it, that too. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I can speak on behalf of ICSS. I'd let somebody else, Gene, if you want to say something on it. The ICSS, which is Institute for Critical Study of Society, gives a forum to people on the left, and they are open to tech workers from the South to come and join or make presentations about what they're doing, and I think that would be a great idea. About the thing that you're referring to, working class movement in the United States, is very much in the retreat. As I mentioned, when I came here, 32% or 33, 1/3 of the working class was organized in labor unions, okay? Today, it's less than 9, somebody told me 7%, somewhere between 7 and 9%. And that's the defeat of the working class, which was, trade union was not a revolutionary movement, never is. The trade union represents workers' interest in a particular industry to they're selling wage labor and get the best price for their labor power. Okay, so and that's another thing in which Lenin had a big difference with the Mensheviks, and that was the parting company with Martov and others who wanted to use the trade unions as the main vehicle for revolution. And Lenin said, no, trade unions should be, the Leninist party will have relationship with trade unions, and we'll support their demands for better wages. We're not against that. But trade unions are not the vehicle for revolution. And so the trade union movement is very weak here, and there have been feeble attempts. Even Obama said, he'll come and strengthen it and all that, and guess what happened? Nothing like that happened. So because Obama, in the end, reflected the same interest, which is the finance capital. There is difference between Democrats and Republicans. I'm not saying they're exactly the same thing, but both are parties of capitalist class. Now, as to the other point, I think you're talking about Lenin's having higher wages for some workers. In a desperate condition after the revolution, a lot of the specialists who ran the industry left with their bosses to Western Europe and the United States. Okay, and then after there was a Red Terror, okay, because there was an attempt on Lenin's life, they let loose a Red Terror that made all others, a lot of others went, and so they were at a premium. Even American specialists went from here, Bay Area, and worked in the Soviet Union because they worked in the Depression time, not in Lenin's time, but in Stalin's time. So that question of wages, even under Stalin was saying you can't be a leveler. This is a Stalin statement that you have to have some incentive, and Progressive Labor Party says that was the return back to capitalism. Now, some people may agree with that. Maybe it was. I'm not saying anything about that. I think the problem was that revisionism came up because they could not solve certain problems, and people like Khrushchev could not resolve the problems of socialist production, which Stalin writes in the last year of his life. Problems, economic problems of socialism. So that wasn't resolved, and Khrushchev comes back and is persuaded by the same specialists that Stalin was fighting, and starts bringing incentives and so forth. So that's the second part. I'm not, you're writing a book on it, so I'll read your book and learn more, Karthik. I know you're writing a book on that. So that's my answer on that.
Okay, next is Norma.
Hi. Richard said something about there not being a revolutionary party. And I work with the Peace and Freedom Party. I'm sure people consider it not to be a strong enough advanced program toward revolution. I don't agree. If we were able to follow the positions expressed through the platform, it'd be altogether communist revolutionary. But I thought maybe that there might be some way that Richard could say what is lacking. For example, yesterday and the week before, the Communist Party presented a program on what it's about, 5 hours each day. And yesterday, a person went on talking about the obligations of a person attached to who attaches themselves to the Communist Party, a person who says of themselves that they're communist and then joins, and the obligations implied that this person is accepting are very strenuous. The things that I have never known to commit to or was able to commit to. I mean, one of the things about this area of the world is anybody you approach, it seems, is deeply committed to whatever position and work in society and the social structure that they've committed themselves to. And it's very often not towards communism and socialism, and they won't be swayed. My favorite is the person that I spend a lot of time talking with who says, well, I'll go and pray on that.
Okay, just a couple more seconds.
So I'd like to hear about the ideas about what is not being done. Got it. Thank you. Oh, sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just let me finish my sentence. I repeat, my question was to hear if anybody wants to say what is not satisfactory about the
Oops.
in their work and in their written material platforms. So. Hello, did you get what my whole question was? What's wrong with people's work?
No, I'm not going to. I don't want to criticize any party, and they're all struggling. I'm not saying that they're doing anything wrong. The thing is for.
I was asking Richard.
Okay, Richard.
Or anybody else. You don't need to defend. I'm just wondering. And if nobody wants to talk about it, it's fine.
Why don't we go ahead to Gene? There are other people who are waiting. Gene?
My turn?
Yes.
Well, I want to thank my comrade, Raj, for presenting a very informative and thought-provoking discussion. But at the same time, since we are comrades, when he makes some fundamental errors, I think it's necessary to bring these out and discuss them. And I think the fundamental problem that I see in his talk is that Lenin lives. He lives on in the party that he founded, the Bolsheviks, which became the Communist International. And that party still rules in Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and above all, China. And I think people just don't understand that, you know, after Lenin, we have about 100 years of experience. Marxist-Leninists in which Marxist-Leninists have tried to learn the lessons of how you build and run a socialist society. And I think it's very important we pay attention to that. And if we want to know what's going on in China, I think it's important to understand what the Chinese think they're doing. And nobody bothers to read what the Chinese say in their constitution, which represents the interests of the workers and peasants of China, the same way our constitution represents the interests of the capitalists and the old slave owners. So I think we need to take this seriously. And if you read the constitution of the People's Republic of China, you will see that the People's Republic of China is a socialist state under the people's democratic dictatorship led by the working class and based on the alliance of workers and peasants, which is in essence the dictatorship of the proletariat. And you don't get any more hardcore Leninism than that right there. And again, they stress this, that it's under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the guidance of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, and Xi Jinping thought on Chinese and socialist characteristics for a new era. And I think I look to the Chinese Communist Party for guidance because I think they understand Leninism far better than anyone in the United States does, because they've been practicing it. And you examine their actual practice, what have they done? they have served the working class and peasants by increasing by eliminating poverty, essentially. An 8-fold increase in the income of workers in China. And that includes a 200% increase in the lowest paid workers in China.
It's about 10 seconds more.
And I'm just saying that that is the characteristic of China. And I think people need to learn from China than to substitute their own misguided ideas about Marx and Lenin on China. That's all.
Can we get the screen that shows everybody?
You can do that, I believe, from your screen.
No, I can't.
Raj, do you want to comment?
Well, I think what I hear Gene and Richard are saying is that once you have socialism, then even if they become, as long as the Communist Party rules, even if the mode of production changes to capitalism, that is still okay. You know, in other words, the workers in China are saying, thank God Xi is handing me over to a capitalist to be exploited because I earn more today than I earned 10 years ago. But this is not, I mean, Marx makes it clear. It's the poverty is not about dollars earned. It's the power of the class. And you're saying that power of the class rests in the hands of people who think you're better off under capitalism. This is a kind of a strange logic to me. And maybe I should not have read Karl Marx's Capital. Maybe I should not have read Lenin's works and other, Stalin's works. But everything I've read in Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, this is not what I'm hearing from Gene cannot be supported by that. So, these are two different views of reality that some people see one way, other view. I consider this saying China is a socialist country, and under socialism, capitalism can acquire dominant mode of production. I wouldn't have a problem if it was a marginal mode of production. Because, reality is you can have some capitalist production at the margins and live with it. As long as it doesn't have the power to accelerate and take over society. Now, so the best you can say is that capitalism and socialism is in contention in China. But which side is growing? The growing side is capitalist mode of production. And more you see this is what's doing. And how does China invest its money outside? Soviet Union invested money and gave support to third world countries which are not even socialist for their development, for their independent development, but they did not make money on it. People claim that it was a social imperialism, and that was the one big mistake of Chinese Communist Party. Okay, and then now I think you can, if they were to use their own words, they'll be called social imperialists because they themselves are investing money, actually making money. So how is this to be explained other than the fact there is a restoration of capitalism in China, but it is not the same variety as in the West. So there is a difference. I acknowledge there is a difference. But what does this difference mean in the lives of the working people? Having more wages is not, I got a lot more wages in the United States than I got in India, but I still exploited as a worker, and I could feel that pressure of exploitation and abuse by the system. Are you saying that that doesn't happen in China? I don't agree.
Next is Mehmet and then Sharon. Mehmet?
Oh, hi, yes. First of all, thank you, Raj, for the presentation. It was a very good one. Now, in these times when, when capitalism is failing right and left, brought on by or just displayed by this coronavirus, epidemic, but the contradictions were much, much, much deeper, and we had it coming. But unfortunately, we are seeing that there is no party that can take over the situation and lead the working classes. So yes, it's a tremendous discussion to have a party that will lead to something. But what is that thing? I think Raj also emphasized the revolutionary side, the revolutionary party we are talking about. But what type of a model are we talking about in the United States or elsewhere in the world? Lenin is a Marxist precisely because he was a revolutionary. So his revolutionary side trumps all other aspects of his, I don't know, life career, I would say. So looking at this, you know, I was suggesting, and I'm still very strongly suggesting, that we have some sessions on the theory of revolution in the library, because we have several models. I don't hear this much discussed in the United States, although around the world, this is the #1 topic among the leftists. Are we going to have, I'm thinking out loud, a national democratic revolution? Or is it a permanent revolution? Is it a continuous revolution? These are all different models. A protracted people's war, or we have started to see in the last 20 years or so what we are seeing in Venezuela or Bolivia, where you bypass the insurrectional or violent revolutions and start to come or try to come to power and the results of it. So these are very interesting because it shows us where through Lenin, where and how the working class can get to power, which is the first step. And then, yes, the second step is how to maintain that, how to build socialism on it. But I do not see much discussion on how to grab the power. And I'm sure next week when you talk about Bernie Sanders and things, this is going to come out. But I believe this discussion is essential on how to build a party, build it on what theory. I mean, even Lenin, I think, was saying that, yes, even going back to Marx, they were expecting that the revolutions would happen in the most developed countries in Europe. And that did not materialize. And Lenin's success was that to show that the revolutions could be done in those places where capitalism was not the most developed. So building on it, I think we need to come up with understanding of how that revolution looks today. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Raj.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah. Can I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I agree with you. There are different models of how the previously ruled can become rulers, which is, oppressed, working, exploited and oppressed. Okay. These two categories combine to take power, inverting the power relation. Okay. Previous exploiters and oppressors are not under their control, so they can't do it anymore. There are different ways, but one thing is constant. If you look at all those revolution, what Lenin says about violent struggle, that takes place. I mean, it takes place in Russia, it takes place in China, it takes maybe different ways. I mean, Mao devised a different way of doing it, encircling the city with the countryside, and he built his forces and all that. Then North Korea is different, but the fact that you have an historically entrenched, powerful group of tiny minority that rules and diminishes your life, okay? You are a cog in the wheel and you have no say in the matter. And you can live better, you can buy more commodities, but actually you're working. I mean, like in China, they're working. Well, how are the workers working? They're coming from countryside. They don't have rights in the cities. They have very limited rights. They live in these. So to me, that is exploitative way of life. How can anybody who represents workers could be saying, well, that's socialism. So yeah, I think there should be discussion on this revolutionary theory. I mean, in the United States, revolution is a far-off thing. Okay, it may become time. COVID might expedite that time 100-fold. That's possible. But you know, one thing is that there was a revolt of the working people in the United States when they elected Trump, for example, in the Midwest. They saw that both parties were bullshitting for 40 years while they're losing jobs and life going down. But they were not conscious of their class. They basically didn't see that this impostor, Trump, is not from their representing their class. Bought into it, bought into his fascist-like ideas, and bought into his hatred of the minorities and immigrants. So we're far from that. It can turn around, and it probably will turn around. There's nothing to say it won't happen here, but we're far from there. I mean, many more steps will come in between. And this is not, I'm saying, the fault necessarily of any communist party. Your revolution requires two conditions, Lenin said, that the working class or the oppressed cannot no longer live the way it used to be able to live. And the other one is the rulers can't rule the way they used to be able to rule. Both these conditions are necessary. They didn't exist. COVID-19 might bring us to that. It's possible. I might bring it to that in India and many other places. We don't know. This is a whole new situation. So yeah, but that thing that transfer of power is not going to be through the ballot box or some struggle and then gives it. I mean, what Bernie Sanders had talked about is getting some concessions, kind of a mild concession compared to what Roosevelt did. And nobody accuses Roosevelt of being a communist, okay? He was saving the system. So that's my response.
Okay, Sharon. Trying to.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that and I appreciate what Eugene said. Part of the way in which we look at China as socialist is to emphasize that the state-run enterprises are still a very key part of the economy, especially the heights of the economy that the working class has to control in order to build socialism. A similar process to what we're talking about of the petty bourgeoisie becoming part of the working class is ongoing in China, with a huge movement of people from the countryside to the cities. And when I was in China 10 years ago, I spoke to someone who had studied in the United States, so I could speak to him because he had very good English, but he was a professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and he a professor of political economy. He said that the models that they're using project that by the end of this century, there will be 700 million people in China. The population will decrease by half. And I just gasped when he said it. And he said, yes, that's what it shows that the one-child policy is going to result in. Of course, that's been loosened up a little, but clearly the population will go down considerably, and that's China's contribution, one of China's contributions to the climate change, combating climate change. But what he said is that everybody was grappling, the planners were all grappling with the question, okay, why are we building infrastructure for 1.4 billion people if we're going to only need that much, the amount of infrastructure for much fewer people in later on, a mere 80 years from now. And I've talked to other people who are members of the Communist Party of China who are grappling with that same question. And I don't know that it's been resolved, but it's a major contribution of China in so many ways. And I just wanted to add that to the overall discussion. And one more thing, Lenin said that the revolutions in what we call the first world countries, he didn't use that term, of course, but industrialized countries, were going to inspire and help the revolutions in the South, or what we call the third world countries, or the nationally oppressed. And Ho Chi Minh said, no, you're wrong. He told Lenin he was wrong, that really it was going to be the other way around. And yes, that's what happened in the second half of the 20th century. But we're coming out now we've emerged from the period of national liberation being a part of the momentum towards socialism. And so I think that we need to look at it from different lens going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Raj, comment?
I want to react to that, actually. I find it really amazing that the Marxists, Sharon, I'm amazed that we as Marxists will accept this one-child policy as consistent with socialism. Now, you can say that in poverty, the country is so desperately poor that they have to do it. But to say that one policy will continue and then China will be a society of old people, and that's our contribution to environmental preservation, to me, it completely goes against Marxian view, socialist view of humanity. Okay? It is more like, I want to control this thing, because if you live in a world of consumerism, that's how you destroy environment. Okay? You don't destroy environment. There are two ways the environment is destroyed: by utter poverty and by utter consumption, because you're driving it because you have to grab through commodities the profit. Okay? Because you can't do it any other way. You just keep on ramping it up. Both are dehumanizing. And so for China to say we cannot build an economy in which we can have a balance, if they said, okay, we don't want growth in population because we have limited resources, it'll still fall within the realm of humanity that has to be human freedom and existence as a human being, has to be in the center of it. I don't mean the human rights. I don't want to fall into that bourgeois trap. But this one. So to me, that is actually shows that this coercive mechanism on part of their government is actually not reflective of socialism, something else. And it's not very healthy at all. If they said, okay, we want that if somebody has 3 people, you have 1 people, we just don't want growth, okay? But what happens is, as people come out of poverty, population stops growing. This has been observed everywhere. This is actually a more Malthusian approach that your professor that you met is saying and calling it socialism or Marxian. Farshid is there. I want to ask a question.
Oh, Farshid, did you have a question?
No, just I wanted to show my agreement with what Raj says. This is the new Malthusian, which was advocated by a lot of higher level of the bourgeoisie in all the world, that they wanted by lowering the increase of the population, get to the environment control. And this is not a Marxian approach.
Could I just add one other factor?
Yes, go ahead,
which would be a separate discussion, but very important. I have spoken to a number of Chinese young women, young meaning much younger than I am, 4 in particular, not all at the same time, people who didn't know each other. Of course, I admit I can only speak to people who speak English, so that limits my perspective. But each and every one of those 4 people said to me that they personally were very happy with the one-child policy. They were delighted to have only one child, and there was enormous pressure from the older generation and their parents in particular to have more than one child for many different reasons. I mean, you go to China and you walk in the parks, as I did, and in the many cities that we went to, you see 4 grandparents hovering over one child. And they would, all the grandparents would like to have more than one grandchild. But the young women were saying, you know, it's very hard to have more than one child, especially, you know, they're living in very small places, mostly apartments, very small. And in addition, you know, wanting to be a worker in whatever way they wanted to be. These particular people were mainly intellectual workers, but you know, that they were talking about, you know, their own life plan. So I think you have to factor that in. And they have relaxed that policy for reasons that are very complex, but we'll see how it evolves. Anyway, it's a very interesting question, of course.
So I'd like to speak for a minute. This is Rich.
Hold on a second, Rich. I guess you don't have your hand raised, or?
I do, or I did.
Yeah, and you have my hand raised.
Well, Rich hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, so we'll let Rich go first. We'll let Rich go first.
I've had mine up for 15 or 20 minutes.
Actually,
it would be
nice. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the problem is I can't tell if you've seen it or not. And maybe
yeah, go ahead.
when I put
Rich.
mine up,
Look,
I'm speaking.
Okay.
I assume you can hear me. So
Yeah.
if when I put my hand up, I would appreciate it if someone just acknowledge it. Then I'm fine to wait. But if I don't know if you see it,
Rich, why don't you go and make your comment? Go ahead.
I'm making my comment right now. Okay, so I do have something to say about the Chinese one-child policy. I believe, if I remember right, it's now a two-child policy. And at the same time, like Sharon just mentioned or referred to, there's a resistance to just jump ahead with 2 children because you're the one particular person that I know met last year as a student at UC Berkeley for a year said that she has a 12-year-old daughter. She says no way that she's having another child right now. And Sharon sort of referenced it. But I have another deeper point. It's kind of related, but it was from a second ago. And that was that this process that began in 1949 or whatever, you know, of the socialism becoming the state, what do you want to call it? Anyway, so Chinese became socialist. I don't know the numbers. I wish I did. It's kind of important. That the percentage, the number of people that were living in the countryside and not proletarianized, and then the number of people now that are becoming proletarianized. So for me, the question is, if the proletariat is leading the revolution, is the leading force in the revolution, but they don't have that quantitatively, they don't have the numbers to be they're not the vast majority. In other words, all this is assumed on the capitalist developing first, which is not what happened in China. So they came out of the war, and they're trying to not starve to death, you know, which that's a big issue, and get up their, what do you call it, mode of production to where they can make enough food and necessities for people to live a reasonable life. So they're in that process right now, and they're doing quite well, it appears. It seems like they are. So my point, I guess my point of contention is that Lenin had the NEP for 6 or 7 years, and we can all rationalize that, and I don't see a problem. I think they did the right thing. I think it's sort of the same problem, but still a very different culture, very different situation. So
just a few more seconds, Rich. Go ahead.
I hear you. So now we have the Chinese that have been doing it for 40, 50 years, or at least since 80. And it's, you know, we can all point fingers at it. But I say, if the Chinese call them socialists, and with socialist conditions, I mean with Chinese characteristics, then let them try that. I don't see a major problem. I do see problems with the people becoming proletarianized, and someone mentioned Raj or someone, that they don't have the perfect life. That's true. But this is a process. It takes more than 10 years, more than 20 years. It's a process. So I say give them a minute, you know, give them another minute, give them another 10 or 20, 30 years. They've got goals. Like someone said, look at, like Eugene said, look at the Constitution, all that stuff, see what they claim they're striving for.
Rich, we got two other
I
people
made
with
my
their hands up. Okay.
I've made my point.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Norma's next.
Hi, I've posted a couple of comments on the chat in case anybody would like to review what I've been thinking as people have been talking. The other thing is, somebody said about Trump that he hates minorities and foreigners. He doesn't hate those. He has a need to manipulate them in the favor of however he sees the advancement of his status. So he's too cold-hearted and minded to be busy hating. It takes a lot of time and effort that he doesn't have in his mind. That's all.
I just want to respond. It wasn't me saying he hates them. I think he used that kind of racism to garner votes from his supporters who are
Did I just say
not
that?
developed in consciousness. That sorry, can you not hear?
I said, did I not say that?
I said it wasn't me who said that.
I didn't say it was. I said, wasn't I saying what you're saying?
Okay, Norma, why don't you
Okay,
let her
then
respond?
I don't have to respond. Anybody other than me?
Any other hands up?
Gene's hand's up.
I don't see your hand up, Gene, but you can go ahead and talk.
I did try to raise it, but anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, here in America, we all think we know what socialism is. And if a country doesn't, like China, doesn't conform to our conception of what socialism should be, then we know it's not socialism. Well, that's not a very Marxist approach, and Marx explicitly repudiated that view. But what I want to say is, for me, there's a lot of different views about socialism, but for me, the revolutionary core of socialism lies in those countries that have actually had socialist revolutions. Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Cuba, and others. And we need to look to those countries because the situation of a communist party for socialism changes when socialism has state power. And we need to understand that. And I'll just stop there.
Well, I think we have two different views here. I have a great deal of respect and admiration for Gene to kind of characterize his view as non-Marxist, so I won't do that. So I think these are our differences, okay, among comrades. I go by the teachings of Marx and Lenin, okay? To me, that is what they teach us. It's not that the country established after the revolution, now they are, because whatever they do, we must have faith in it. That is not what Marx and Lenin teach. They teach you the foundations of what it is that talking, otherwise all that would be necessary is faith, but that's religion in my opinion.
Okay, other hands up? Anybody? I don't see any other hands. Am I missing anybody? Okay, I think
it's almost 12:30 now. Anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for the discussion. So I'll turn it back.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thanks to everybody to listen to me today. Spent 2 hours of your time.
Thank you so much.
This isn't over.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mehmet, for guiding us through this technological thing.
No worries. No.
Sorry about my service. Sorry about my service at my end.
No.
Okay. See you guys next Sunday.
Excellent.
Next Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Well,